The Legend of Zelda, a franchise once synonymous with intricate dungeons, puzzle solving, and magical instruments that somehow function as a military-grade weapon, has changed a lot in just a few short years. With the release of Breath of the Wild in 2017, the entire Zelda formula was turned on its head, changing the series from a dungeon crawler to an open-world adventure game seemingly overnight. Having put hundreds of hours into both Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, I had to find out which one was the best. From the moment you start this game, you know you're getting into something special.
This is the best thing ever made.
Breath of the Wild does a beautiful job of laying out the story in front of you and allowing you to find it at your own speed. Link wakes up in a cave after a 100-year nap, and when he gets outside, he finds Hyrule in ruins. The opening shot of Link standing on the cliff's edge looking over Hyrule is one of my favorite shots in video game history. It perfectly sets up the scale of the world and the journey you're about to go on in the best way possible. The first chunk of the game is walled off into the Great Plateau, and this is the perfect tutorial area for a game like this. You meet an old man who gives you a rundown of the current state of the world, and with his help and your new tool, the Sheikah Slate, you uncover things that have been lost to Hyrule for 100 years. Mainly the towers and the shrines. The towers work just like they would in most open world games, revealing a large chunk of the map based off where you're located, serving as a small puzzle to solve for a big reward. And the shrines give you a sort of micro dungeon that gives you a puzzle to solve in order to get a reward. There are 120 different shrines to explore spread all across the world. And I'll be honest, I love the idea of shrines, but I still miss the large dynamic dungeons that we had in the past. The older 3D Zelda games from Ocarina of Time all the way to Skyward Sword followed a very similar structure, having a very linear game where the story and progression follows one strict path, and Breath of the Wild is not that. But it's not trying to be. Up until Breath of the Wild, Zelda was split into two primary forms of game. You had your top-down games like A Link to the Past, which were great, and you had your 3D games like Ocarina of Time, which were also great, both of which generally follow a very similar structure as far as progression, but Breath of the Wild broke the conventional Zelda formula in pretty much every way. And to me, instead of replacing the 3D Zelda formula that fans know and love, this feels like a different third option, being entirely distinct and separate from the other two forms of Zelda games that we've had in the past. Similar to how when Ocarina of Time came out, it changed the Zelda formula forever. So instead of having large, intricate dungeons that you explore in a certain order, we have an entirely new system with shrines and towers, and that's something that I love. On the Great Plateau, there are 4 shrines, each giving you a new tool for your Sheikah Slate that will help you navigate the world. Zelda has always been known for its fun puzzles, and this is no different. But generally, in a Zelda game, you are given items to help you solve those puzzles. But Breath of the Wild goes an entirely different direction, giving you a bunch of reusable tools right off the rip that you can use to solve puzzles in any way you want. There's the bombs that are bombs. They come in 2 different shapes, round and square, which allow you to blow things up in your path. And I personally love that I have an infinite amount of bombs that I can bring on my journey, and you can trigger them whenever you want, adding a great level of strategy. There's stasis, which allows you to freeze enemies and objects in place for a short amount of time, and you can whack it to build up energy to send things flying a different direction. There's magnesis, which allows you to take control of metal objects and move them wherever you want, and cryonis, which allows you to build ice blocks out of water.
Well, 3 out of 4 isn't that bad.
I was really confused when the game gave me all of the tools I'll need right out of the gate and told me to go explore, but the more I've played, the more I enjoy it. Breath of the Wild has a very unique take on puzzle solving that I adore. Everything you do, from a small encounter with enemies to a shrine's puzzle, can be solved in a myriad of ways, and having a consistent kit of tools right off the rip is extremely nice, because they can help you solve almost any puzzle you come across. And the best part about it is there's no right way to do anything. If there's enemies in front of you, you can go up and fight them in a typical Zelda fashion using weapons. You can sneak around and plant bombs near them and blow them up, or you can steal their weapons, leaving them entirely vulnerable. But no matter what you do, there is no right way to do it. Every aspect and encounter in this game is purely situational, mostly because you always have a different selection of equipment on hand at any given time. Every weapon in this game besides the Master Sword is breakable, and it doesn't matter if it's a sword, shield, spear, or bow, everything has a limited amount of uses, which means you need to change how you take on an encounter depending on what you have. If there's a large group of strong enemies in front of you, it makes you have to think about what you have and how to best take on the situation, and again, there's no right way to do it. Everything from a small puzzle to a boss fight depends on what you have at that given time. And in order to get more supplies, you have to explore the world. Like I said before, Breath of the Wild is an open world Zelda game, and there's no way to take it on in a linear path because there is no path in the first place. Once you finish the tutorial on the Great Plateau, you can do whatever you want.
You can walk directly to the final boss fight if you want to live in pain.
Breath of the Wild doesn't tell the story in the same way a typical Zelda game would. There are certain areas in the game where Link gets context about what's happened in the last 100 years since before and after the Calamity, giving you flashbacks of events that took place right before the Day of Reckoning, but it's entirely up to you to find those spots. You can miss them entirely or go for hours without seeing one because you're not exploring in the right places. And though this makes the overall narrative a little hard to follow, it serves as another way to encourage you to explore the world, which is what this game does best. There is nothing like exploring and finding a little area that gives you some context about what happened before the Day of Calamity, getting to see how Link, Zelda, and the other champions weren't ready for what was about to happen. And though this makes the story a little convoluted and hard to follow at times, once you have the full picture, it makes the experience that much more special. And it's not just these random areas out in the wild that give you the story. The major locations in the game all have their own towns and cities, full of people willing to share their story about what their life is like. And these major towns in the game are part of the overall story. On the Day of Calamity, there were 4 divine beasts, each operated by one of the 4 champions from the given locations. These were tools that were supposed to help during the Day of Calamity,
but they're about as helpful as expired rash cream.
Ganon took them over on the Day of Calamity, and it is now your job to free them from his control. These serve more as a replacement for the typical dungeon that you would get in a Zelda game, because unlike shrines, these are full of puzzles that you need to solve, ending with a boss fight. The Divine Beasts do a perfect job of feeling somewhat like a typical Zelda dungeon for fans of the series, while still feeling new and fresh and giving tons of information about what happened on the Day of Calamity. The beasts encourage you to explore to all 4 corners of the world to see what the game has to offer.
They're cool looking animal robots, so that's a plus from me.
Even though the story is told in a very weird, non-linear way, the story itself is still really good. Link has a backstory of being a knight and protector of Zelda before the Day of Calamity, meeting all of the champions and seeing what they brought to the table, and even the world of Hyrule itself being in ruin because of the large battles that took place, all come together to tell a story that's larger than the sum of its parts. And when you put it all together, we were given a fresh, brand new feeling Zelda game that has never been attempted in the past. Now, that's not to say this is the best Zelda game of all time or that it's perfect, because Breath of the Wild does have its fair share of issues. One of the major complaints is that Hyrule feels empty in a lot of locations on the map. A good amount of these areas can be used for environmental storytelling, but another large portion of these areas are just open fields for you to breeze by. Now, if there was something in every single nook and cranny, it would be impossible to explore everything this game has to offer, so there does need to be a balance between having stuff to do and having places to connect those locations. But I can understand for some people how going from point A to point B and seeing pretty much nothing but a couple of enemies here and there can take them out of the game experience. Another critique may just be me, but as someone who loves to complete games, the idea of collecting all of the Korok seeds is an absolute nightmare. There are 900 Korok seeds spread across the world, and for the first 200 or 300 I was entirely invested, but after that finding the other 600 Korok seeds was just a pain, and I would love it if there was a great reward for doing so, but you literally get a pile of golden poop. This is straight up golden poop. Tell me I'm wrong.
What is going on in here? What is that smell? That is generational wealth, my friend.
I love how this gives you something to do for the entirety of the game, but I wish the rewards were spread out more evenly and the reward for collecting all of them wasn't just a gag gift, because then it would make getting all of the Korok seeds in a playthrough worth it. I had some other smaller issues, like the weapon durability system in general is a good idea, but with weapons breaking so fast, it feels like anytime I get a good weapon, I feel like I should hide it away or hold on to it because I don't want it to break just in case I need it. And considering there is no way to repair weapons, you just have to hope that you find another weapon to replace the one you currently have. And my last issue is a spoiler for the end of the game, so if you don't want to be spoiled, please skip to the time that you see on screen. You have been warned. The final boss and overall ending of the game is one of the worst in Zelda history. And I would even go as far as to say it's one of the worst in Nintendo's history. When you have a game as good as Breath of the Wild, all you want is more. And once you get to the end of the game and you fight Calamity Ganon, I expected it to be a great, climactic ending that built upon everything the story set up, and the boss fight itself was fine. It was fun, and it encouraged you to actually try because it can be a little bit difficult at times. But as far as content-wise, it was all bark and no bite. Cinematically, it looked stunning, but the gameplay was really boring, and I could get past that if the ending itself held any weight whatsoever. But once you beat the final boss, it just resets you to right before you beat the game. I understand the entirety of the game is to defeat Ganon, but there should have been some sort of post-game that allowed you to see what happens to Hyrule after you defeat him, maybe rebuilding some towns or bridges to help it feel like there was something of substance. But reverting back to the save right before you fight him is not satisfying at all. There's almost no point in defeating him because you get nothing for it. It just serves to wrap up the story and nothing else. And no matter how I've heard it explained, I don't think that was a good decision. I think Breath of the Wild is a phenomenal game. The world you explore is rich, immersive, and rewarding, encouraging players to go and do things they might not do otherwise. Any game that allows me to take it on in whatever order I want is going to be something I love, and when you include the fact the game encourages you to explore and experiment with what it has to offer, then you have something that is truly special, and I'm not surprised it's looked at as one of the best games of all time. I can absolutely understand if you're someone like me who loves the 3D Zelda games of the past, how this could be something that you're not sure you really wanted. But the way I look at it is that this is not a replacement for the 3D Zelda games we've come to know and love. It's more of a third option, and I'm blindly hoping that Nintendo feels the same way I do.
Because if they don't, I'm going to be very sad.
But after a few years of playing Breath of the Wild extensively, we finally got a sequel. Though this may look like a copy and paste of Breath of the Wild, this is an entirely new game, and a lot of things that fans loved about Breath of the Wild were expanded on or changed for this game. This time Link doesn't wake up from beauty sleep, he's in the middle of a quest with Zelda, exploring the ruins of Hyrule and uncovering the world's history. But things quickly fall apart as Ganondorf gives them a menacing look which sends Link and Zelda flying. Link then wakes up on the mysterious Sky Islands knowing that a lot has changed because he's thousands of feet in the air.
How do I get down from here?
Tears of the Kingdom took the entirety of the map of Breath of the Wild, changed it, and added so much more. Not only is there the entirety of the world of Hyrule from the original, they also added the brand new Sky Islands, a collection of islands floating above Hyrule, but also the entirety of the underground, a brand new section of the map that takes place underground.
Wow, what kind of genius could have put that together?
The core of this game feels just like Breath of the Wild. Some major gameplay elements like weapon durability and the shrine system haven't changed all that much, but pretty much everything else about the game feels different. Link threw away his Sheikah Slate and got it replaced with a new prosthetic arm, which is an interesting idea. It has me wondering if Link is ever—
Don't finish your sentence. Please never say those words to me again. I don't want to know where you're going.
His new arm comes with a host of different abilities that feel different than the last game while offering the same level of freedom and exploration. There's the new Ultra Hand, which feels like a souped up version of Magnesis, allowing you to pick up and move items, not just made out of metal, but this time made out of anything you want. This also comes with the ability to stick two things together, which you can use to build some really interesting contraptions, and you can build some basic things like a hover bike, or you can build whatever this is. There's a new Ascend ability, which allows you to dive through solid objects, which makes it way easier to traverse the world because you no longer have to climb your way around, you can just shoot straight through an object. There's the new recall ability, which allows you to send objects back where they came from. This is clearly meant to replace stasis, but it doesn't feel as useful as it did in Breath of the Wild. But arguably the coolest addition to any game I have ever played is the new fuse. This allows you to combine a weapon with another object in order to create something entirely new. And I just love the idea of making these really cool weapons that I will never use elsewhere, but because I can make a barrel sword, I am going to do that. Both the Sheikah Slate and the Zonai Arm are extremely cool, giving Link a plethora of options for any given situation, and they easily could have just copy and pasted what they had in Breath of the Wild over to Tears of the Kingdom, but thankfully they didn't, which gives Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild their own reason to play the game. They allow you to take on puzzles entirely differently, giving you different forms of freedom to take on the game however you want. The story is told in a very similar fashion to Breath of the Wild, where by exploring the world, you're given the option to see what happened in the past. And where Breath of the Wild had an event that happened that you're trying to get more information about that directly happened to you, Tears of the Kingdom takes you back a very long time into the past, about a point of Hyrule's history that I didn't know existed. And as much as I love that I'm getting a ton of lore about the world of Hyrule, I don't feel as connected to the overall story in Tears of the Kingdom as I did with Breath of the Wild. With the Day of Calamity and getting more information about how everything went wrong, I felt like I had stake in the game because it directly affected Link himself. And waking up from a 100-year coma with amnesia and getting all of that information felt like a natural way to tell a story. But in Tears of the Kingdom, you're a layer removed from it because it didn't happen to you, you're just learning about how Ganon got in the basement of Hyrule and how he was sealed the first time. The story is still really good and very entertaining, but it doesn't hook me the same way that Breath of the Wild did. A major change that I really like in Tears of the Kingdom is more of a minor one, and that's that we have full temples in the game similar to the older 3D Zelda games of the past. Now this isn't like what it was in older Zelda games like Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time, but compared to Divine Beast, this temple system feels much more in line of the typical Zelda format that I've come to know and love. In the story of Breath of the Wild, there were champions who help you on your journey. Though they don't help you in the game itself, it was nice to have those characters that you saw Link connect to. But that was done even better in Tears of the Kingdom, where you're given sages that help you on your journey. There are new and returning characters who help you in these temples, and they're not just limited to the temples themselves, they will help you outside of battle once you complete their temple. It's almost like having a follower system in this Zelda format, which in my opinion is incredible. Now the benefits they give you aren't as good as they were in Breath of the Wild for completing a Divine Beast, but going into a battle with a full army of 5 people is a really fun time, and I think it's one of the best changes they added to the game. All of the freedom that Breath of the Wild given you was expanded upon in Tears of the Kingdom, giving you more ways to experience the world of Hyrule that you couldn't before. Whether you're exploring new locations or revisiting old ones, though it may look like the same game that got copy and pasted, it feels entirely different. I have had so much fun building machines that destroy everything in my path just because I can, and just like in Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom gives you the tools to take on anything you want in any way you want to. If you want to go fight something in a typical way with a sword and shield, you can. Or you can build a laser turret to destroy everything near you. One of the best parts of these open world Zelda games is the freedom to take on any puzzle in any way you want to. And Tears of the Kingdom does a great job giving you more options than ever before to create or destroy anything in your path. But similar to Breath of the Wild, this is not a perfect game. I am one of the 5 people who is a massive fan of Skyward Sword. So when I saw The Legend of Zelda was bringing back Sky Islands, I was ecstatic. But outside of a few cool puzzles and a couple of shrines, these Sky Islands were mostly empty. The tutorial island was great, but it feels like it was the only one that was added with a purpose. Luckily, that's made up for by having the underground, which is terrifying and fun to explore, but I wanted the Sky Islands to feel like a brand new area similar to how the underground does, but both of them lack any new locations like towns or cities that make them feel alive and well. I wish there was a Sky Island that was full of Zonai constructs living in a town. or anything to make it feel like it was more alive. But as it stands, it's just there with no real reason for being there. And it's not just the Sky Islands that have issues, both Hyrule and the Depths have the exact same issue. The Depths were supposed to be the dark, mysterious underworld, and they are definitely dark, but after about 10 minutes of exploring the Depths, it's really boring and full of nothing. If you thought Hyrule was empty in Breath of the Wild, go down into the Depths and you will have a reality check like never before. Luckily, there are some locations where you can redo boss fights or find enemies, but the only reason I ever go to the Depths is to collect Zonite, and that's just because it's the only location you can find it reliably. So even though Breath of the Wild had its issues with open spaces that felt a little bit empty, Tears of the Kingdom made that problem twice as bad, and it makes exploring feel like a chore. I still had a blast exploring the Depths and the Sky Islands because it was something new, but I would have rather had smaller locations that were full of stuff to do than giant locations that feel empty. And my last issue is very minor, but everything in this game is so expensive. Rupees do not grow on trees, and there is no good way to collect them without either doing exploits or getting extremely lucky. There is no reason that one armor set in this game should be this expensive. Since I was a child, I have loved Zelda games because they are incredibly fun to play. And this new direction for the Zelda series to go feels like a natural step in the right direction. I can understand how some people prefer the old 3D Zelda games as opposed to the new ones, but in my humble opinion, I think Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are both incredible games. But if I had to pick just one to play, it would be Breath of the Wild. Tears of the Kingdom may feel like a better game overall, but Breath of the Wild had the perfect scale and scope to make every part of the game flow seamlessly. It had the perfect abilities, gameplay, and world to explore to make it so anybody can hop in and play with no prior knowledge of the Zelda series. The progression felt natural, it encouraged you to explore and try out new things, and it does a better overall job of feeling like a Zelda game while still having that open world exploration feeling the series is shifting to. Both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are some of my favorite games of all time. I just really hope Nintendo doesn't forget the series' roots and goes back to a typical 3D Zelda at some point. I'm gonna break it, I swear I'll do it.